They say graduation is the happiest day of your life, but standing in my crimson robes, all I felt was the crushing weight of two empty folding chairs. I snapped a picture of the void where my parents should have been and hit upload without thinking. I thought I was just sharing my solitude. Then my phone started vibrating with a ferocity that told me the world was watching, and my parents were finally afraid. My name is Evelyn Moore, and at 32 years old, I have learned that the loudest sound in the world is the silence of a phone that refuses to ring. I live in a quiet apartment complex in Redwood Heights, a city on the East Coast where the fog rolls in thick off the water and stays until noon. It is a place for people who value privacy and propriety, which makes it a fitting backdrop for the life I have constructed. My apartment is sparse but paid for with my own money. Every stick of furniture and every book on the shelf earned through double shifts and sleepless nights. For the last 4 years, I have existed in a state of perpetual exhaustion. I worked full days at a data analysis firm while completing my master's degree at Harvard. I wrote papers at 3 in the morning. I ate dinner from vending machines more times than I care to admit. I did not do this because I craved the prestige of the Ivy League. I did it because I was still that little girl standing in the hallway, trying to do a magic trick impressive enough to make my parents look up from their newspapers. The Moore family is an institution in Redwood Heights. My parents are the sort of people who are described as pillars of the community. They donate to the right charities and attend the right galas. Their lawn is always manicured to within an inch of its life. They love the idea of a successful daughter. They just do not seem to like the actual person required to fulfill that role. I remember winning the state debate championship when I was 17. My mother looked at the trophy and told me to make sure I dusted it before putting it on the mantel, then went back to her phone call. That moment has replayed in my mind for 15 years. It was a lesson in thermal dynamics I provided the warmth, and they provided the stone wall that absorbed it without reflecting anything back. 2 months ago, I received the official packet for the commencement ceremony. I held the heavy cream envelope in my hands, feeling the raised crimson lettering. It felt substantial. It felt undeniable. I addressed the invitation to my parents with my best penmanship, walked it to the post office, and slid it into the slot. I did not just mail a letter, I mailed a truce. I thought that perhaps Harvard was big enough to bridge the gap. It was the ultimate stamp of approval, the one thing they could brag about to their friends at the country club. I waited for the RSVP. The deadline came and went. I checked my mailbox every day at 5 in the afternoon. I checked my email spam folder. I checked my voicemail. There was nothing. The silence began to fill my apartment like rising water. I sat on my couch and told myself reasonable lies. They are busy people. Dad is closing the merger with the logistics firm. Mom is organizing the spring fundraiser. They probably just assumed I knew they were coming. They are my parents. Parents do not miss their child graduating from Harvard. It is simply not done. Then, 3 days before the ceremony, I was looking for an old contact number on the family cloud account I still had access to. I stumbled upon a calendar entry that had been synced automatically. Flight to Tuscany. Departure, May 24th. I stared at the screen until the pixels blurred. The date was the day before my graduation. They were not busy with work. They were not dealing with a family emergency. They were going on a wine tour. They had booked the tickets 6 months ago. They knew when my graduation was. I had told them the date the moment the academic calendar was released. They had looked at the 2 options, watching their daughter walk across the stage or drinking Chianti in Italy, and the choice had been so easy for them that they had not even bothered to invent an excuse. I sat there in the dim light of my living room, the glow of the laptop illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. The gown I had spent $200 renting hung on the back of the door, wrapped in plastic. It looked like a ghost. I realized then that the silence was not an oversight. It was a message. They were not going to come. And for the first time, the hurt did not make me want to cry. It made me feel something much colder, something that settled deep in my chest like a heavy stone. The air in the room felt pressurized, as if a storm were gathering right above my ceiling, waiting for the roof to give way. The morning of the 25th broke with a sky so blue it felt aggressive. Harvard Yard was transformed into a chaotic sea of crimson and black, vibrating with a nervous electric energy that made my skin prickle. Every inch of the grass was covered by families. I saw fathers adjusting ties with trembling hands and mothers dabbing at their eyes with tissues that probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget. There was a constant hum of laughter, shouted names, and the rustle of expensive programs. The air smelled of heavy perfume, hairspray, and the distinct, earthy scent of thousands of people pretending to be calm. I navigated the crowd like a ghost, while other graduates were forming tight circles with their parents and siblings, creating little islands of celebration. I walked in a straight line toward the seating area. I found my spot in Section B, row 14. The chair was cold metal. I sat down and placed my hands in my lap, smoothing the fabric of my gown. To my left, a girl named Sarah, whom I had shared a statistics class with, was being suffocated in a hug by a man who looked like he might burst with pride. To my right was the empty chair. I had not invited anyone else. I had no siblings, no close cousins, and my few friends were busy with their own families. The empty folding chair next to me became a physical presence. It seemed to grow larger as the minutes ticked by. I pulled my phone out of my pocket, checking it for the 10th time in 5 minutes. The screen was blank. No text messages, no missed calls, no thinking of you emails, just the default wallpaper staring back at me. I looked up and saw Sarah taking a selfie with her family, their faces pressed together, grinning so hard their eyes were crinkled shut. The contrast was a physical blow to the stomach. A woman sitting in the row behind me leaned forward. She was wearing a wide-brimmed hat adorned with artificial flowers that bobbed when she moved. She tapped me on the shoulder. "Excuse me, dear," she said, her voice loud enough to cut through the chatter. "Is this seat taken? My husband is trying to find a spot closer to the front." She pointed a manicured finger at the empty chair beside me. I froze. It was a simple question, practical and harmless, yet it felt like she had taken a paring knife and slid it between my ribs. I looked at the empty seat, the space reserved for the people who were currently sipping wine in a Tuscan villa. "No," I said, my voice sounding thin in my own ears. "It is not taken. My family. They could not make it." The woman's face softened into a pity that was worse than judgment. Oh, I am so sorry, honey. Work something like that." I lied. I forced my lips up into a polite, social smile, the kind I had perfected at company mixers and faculty teas. It was a shield, a way to tell the world that I was fine, that I was resilient, that I did not need anyone holding my hand. She nodded sympathetically and signaled to her husband, who squeezed into the spot. Now the physical gap was gone, filled by a stranger's tweed jacket, but the emotional crater remained. The ceremony began. Speeches rolled over me like waves. Words about legacy and future and changing the world. I barely heard them. I was focused on breathing. I was focused on not crying. When the roll call began, the applause was a rolling thunder. Every name was met with a specific, localized eruption of noise whoops, whistles, air horns. It was a chaotic symphony of love. Then the dean reached the M section. Evelyn Moore. I stood up. I walked the 20 feet to the center of the stage. I waited for the sound. I waited for the whistle or the shout that would mark my existence. There was only the polite, obligatory clapping of the crowd, a flat, dry sound like rain hitting pavement. It was the sound people make when they are waiting for the next person. I took the diploma. I shook the hand. I did not look out at the sea of faces because I knew there were no eyes searching for me. As I turned to descend the stairs, a flash went off. A man with a large camera was kneeling at the edge of the stage. He was not the official university photographer. He looked like a freelancer, dressed in worn jeans and a black t-shirt, hunting for candid shots to sell to wire services. He caught me in the split second before I could put my mask back on. I did not smile for him. I did not wave. I just looked directly into the lens. In that fraction of a second, I did not try to look triumphant. I just felt the weight of the paper in my hand and the crushing reality that I had crossed the finish line alone. I walked back to my seat, the stranger in the tweed jacket shifting to let me pass. I did not know that the shutter had clicked at the exact moment my guard was down. I did not know that the photographer had captured not just a graduate, but a woman realizing that her independence was just a fancy word for abandonment. I thought the moment was over. I had no idea it was just the beginning. I sat on my beige sofa with a slice of cold pepperoni pizza in one hand and my phone in the other. The silence of the apartment was heavy, a stark contrast to the noise inside my head. I had found the photo the freelance photographer took. He had uploaded it to a public gallery of the event, tagged with the university's hashtag. It was a striking image. In a sea of black gowns and smiling faces, I was a singular point of stillness. My chin was up, my eyes were dry, and the empty chair beside me looked less like furniture and more like a verdict. I saved the image. I opened my social media app. I did not curate the lighting or add a filter to soften the harsh reality of the fluorescent stage lights. I just uploaded it. For the caption, I typed 5 words. I did it, even alone. I hit post and tossed the phone onto the cushion beside me. I expected the usual engagement, maybe 20 likes from old classmates, a generic comment from a coworker, and then it would fade into the digital abyss. I fell asleep with the television muttering in the background, exhausted by the sheer effort of existing through the day. When I woke up, my phone was hot to the touch. I unlocked the screen and watched the notifications cascade down like a waterfall. It was not 20 likes. It was 4,000, then 10,000. By the time I made coffee, the post had been shared 6,000 times. The algorithm had grabbed my moment of vulnerability and flung it across the internet. But it was the comments that stopped me cold. Strangers, people I would never meet, living in places I would never visit, were pouring their hearts out in the thread. My father missed my wedding to play golf. One woman wrote, I have not spoken to my parents in 10 years because I was never enough. A man commented, my empty chair had become a mirror. People were not just looking at me, they were looking at themselves. The hashtag even alone began to trend locally, then regionally. It was terrifying and validating all at once. For 32 years, I had been trained to keep family matters private, to polish the surface until it gleamed, regardless of the rot underneath. Now, 100,000 people were seeing the rot, and they were not judging me. They were rallying. By noon, my inbox contained 3 requests for interviews. 2 were from gossip blogs that wanted to know if I was feuding with a celebrity relative. I deleted those. The 3rd was from the Redwood Independent, a digital platform known for long-form essays and cultural commentary. They did not ask for gossip. The subject line simply read, "The cost of the empty chair." I hesitated. My thumb hovered over the delete button. My mother's voice echoed in my head, warning me about airing dirty laundry. We do not discuss private matters. Evelyn, it is vulgar. But then I looked at the calendar. They were in Tuscany right now. They were probably raising a glass of vintage red wine, toasting to their wonderful life, completely unaware that their daughter had just become the poster child for parental neglect. I replied to the email, I can meet at 3 o'clock. I met the journalist at a coffee shop downtown. Her name was Chloe, and she had the sharp, attentive eyes of someone who knew when they were being lied to. I decided right then that I would not offer her a single lie. I would not protect them anymore. Why do you think the photo resonated with so many people? Chloe asked, her recorder running on the table between us. Because we are taught that family is unconditional, I said, my voice steady. But for many of us, it is a transaction. And sometimes, you realize you have run out of currency. I told her everything. I did not exaggerate. I did not paint my parents as villains with mustache-twirling evil plans. I just described the facts. I told her about the invitation sent 2 months in advance. I told her about the lack of an RSVP. I told her about the flight to Italy booked 6 months ago. I laid out the timeline with the precision of the data analyst I was. They were not busy, I told Chloe, watching her scribble furiously in her notebook. They just had better things to do. When the interview wrapped up, I felt lighter. It was a physical sensation, as if I had been carrying a backpack full of bricks and had finally set it down. I walked home through the cooling evening air. The article was set to go live the next morning. The internet was already buzzing with questions. People had moved past the stage of sympathy and were entering the phase of investigation. Internet sleuths were already trying to identify the university and the specific ceremony. It would not take them long to find the Moore family name. The silence my parents had used as a weapon was about to turn into the loudest noise they had ever heard. They wanted a quiet, dignified daughter. Instead, they had created a story that the world could not stop reading. The interview with Chloe turned into an excavation. We had moved past the graduation ceremony and were digging into the bedrock of my history, chipping away at the polished surface of the Moore family legacy. Chloe was good at her job. She did not ask leading questions. She just opened doors and waited for me to walk through them. "You mentioned your independence earlier," she said, looking down at her notes. "Is that something your parents encouraged?" I laughed, but it was a dry, hollow sound. Independence in my house was not a virtue. It was a convenient excuse for neglect. I told her about my brother, Julian. Julian was 2 years younger, charming, and perpetually adrift. When Julian crashed his car, my father was there with a checkbook and a hug. When Julian failed a semester of college, my mother flew out to help him organize his apartment and cook him meals. When I was promoted to senior analyst at 25, my father just nodded and asked if the salary was enough to keep me from asking them for money. They loved that I did not need them, I told Chloe, but they hated that they could not control me. The memories washed over me, sharp and distinct. I told her about the years I spent working at the Northbridge Analysis Group. It was a grueling job, analyzing market trends for high-risk portfolios. I worked 60-hour weeks. I barely slept, but the pay was significant, and that was where the story twisted. "People think my parents are wealthy," I said, leaning in closer. "And they are, in terms of assets, but cash flow. That was always a different story." I told her about the wire transfers. 3 years ago, my father had made a bad investment in a tech startup that evaporated overnight. He called me, not to apologize for missing my birthday the week before, but to ask if I had liquidity. He needed $50,000 to cover a bridge loan before the bank noticed. "Did you give it to him?" Chloe asked. "I did," I replied. "I transferred $50,000 from my savings account. It was the down payment for a house I wanted to buy. I sent it within 2 hours. And what did they say?" My mother sent a text message. She said, "Received, thanks." That was it. No phone call, no discussion of repayment. It was as if I had simply paid a utility bill that was overdue. I looked at the calendar on the wall. The world outside was moving at a normal pace, people walking dogs and catching buses, completely unaware that I was dismantling my entire life in a booth in the corner. I realized something back then, but I buried it. I said, my voice dropping, "I was not their daughter. I was their insurance policy. I was a resource. When the resource performed well, they ignored it because it was functioning as intended. When the resource failed to yield what they wanted, like when I chose Harvard over the state school closer to home so I could run errands for them, they punished me with silence. The silence was their favorite weapon. It was efficient. It left no bruises. If I did something they disapproved of, the phone calls stopped. The holiday invites got lost in the mail. They would freeze me out until I came crawling back, apologizing for crimes I had not committed. But this time, I had not crawled back. I had posted a picture. Chloe paused, her pen hovering over her notebook. She looked at me with an expression that was part reporter and part human being witnessing a car crash. "Evelyn," she said softly, "knowing all of this, knowing that you were a resource to them and not a person, do you regret waiting for them? Do you regret looking at that empty chair and wishing they were in it?" The question hung in the air between us. It was heavy and suffocating. Do I regret it? I thought about the little girl who won the debate trophy. I thought about the woman who wired $50,000 to save a reputation that did not belong to her. I thought about the silence in my apartment while they drank wine in Tuscany. To say I regretted it would mean admitting that I had known the truth all along and chose to ignore it. To say I did not regret it would mean admitting that I was still that desperate little girl waiting for a scrap of affection. I opened my mouth to answer, but the words caught in my throat. I looked down at my hands, resting on the scarred wooden table. They were shaking. Not from fear, but from the sheer, overwhelming exhaustion of loving people who were incapable of loving me back. I started, then stopped. I took a breath, but it felt shallow. The answer was there, sitting on the tip of my tongue, but saying it out loud would make it real. And once it was real, there was no going back. The article went live at exactly 9 o'clock in the morning. I sat at my kitchen table, watching the view count climb from a few hundred to several thousand in the span of time it took me to drink a cup of coffee. The notification light on my phone blinked a steady, rhythmic warning. Then the vibration started. It was not the gentle hum of social media notifications anymore. It was the long, demanding buzz of an incoming call. The name on the screen was Mother. For a split second, a reflex born of 3 decades of conditioning kicked in. I reached out to answer. My hand hovered over the green button. I could almost hear her voice before I even accepted the connection. I imagined she was calling to apologize. I imagined she had seen the photo, read the article, and finally understood the gravity of her absence. I slid my thumb across the screen and lifted the phone to my ear. Evelyn. Her voice was not soft. It was high-pitched, breathless, and sharp enough to cut glass. "Have you lost your mind? Aunt Martha just sent me a link. What is this garbage? You need to take it down right now before I ended the call." I did not say a word. I just pressed the red button and set the phone back down on the table. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat of adrenaline, but my hands were surprisingly steady. The phone went black for 3 seconds. Then it lit up again. Father. He never called. In my entire adult life, my father had called me perhaps 5 times, usually to ask where I had filed a specific tax document or to tell me he was changing his email address. Now, he was calling me back to back. I let it ring. The vibration rattled the spoon against my coffee saucer. It was a violent, intrusive sound in the quiet apartment. He called 4 times in a row. When I did not answer, the text messages began to arrive. They appeared on the lock screen in a rapid-fire staccato. "Answer the phone. Evelyn. This is incredibly childish. Do you have any idea who reads that publication?" I watched the messages stack up, one after another, forming a digital wall of panic. They were not asking if I was okay. They were not asking why I felt so abandoned that I would spill our secrets to a journalist. They were issuing commands. They were trying to manage a crisis. Then, a message from my mother popped up that made the air leave my lungs. "The Sterling partners are coming for dinner next week. If they see this, the merger could be compromised. You are being selfish. Fix this." I stared at the words. The Sterling merger, of course. That was why they were panicking. It was not because their daughter was hurting. It was not because the world knew they were bad parents. It was because the bad press might spook the investors for their new venture. They were worried about the stock price of their reputation. A cold clarity washed over me. It started at my fingertips and spread through my chest. extinguishing the last flickering ember of guilt I had been holding on to. All morning, a small part of me had felt sick, terrified that I had betrayed them, that I had been too harsh. But that text message was a receipt. It proved exactly what I had told Chloe in the coffee shop. I was not a daughter to them. I was a liability. The phone buzzed again, another call from my father. I looked at his name. I thought about the $50,000 I had wired him. I thought about the empty chair. I thought about the years I had spent trying to be perfect, trying to be quiet, trying to be the kind of investment that paid dividends. I reached out and silenced the ringer. I did not turn the phone off. I wanted to see them try. I wanted to see every desperate attempt they made to regain control. For the first time in my life, I held the power. They were screaming into the void, and I was finally the one deciding whether or not to listen. I took a sip of my coffee. It was cold, but I drank it anyway. The silence in the apartment was no longer lonely. It felt heavy, protective, and for the first time, entirely mine. I agreed to meet them 3 days later at a coffee shop in the financial district. It was neutral ground, far enough from their social circle to avoid prying eyes, but public enough to ensure physical safety. I arrived 10 minutes early. I ordered a black coffee and sat with my back to the wall, watching the door. When they walked in, they looked like a caricature of the perfect American couple. My father was wearing his tailored navy suit, and my mother had a silk scarf tied effortlessly around her neck. They were tan from the Tuscan sun, a golden glow that looked grotesque against the tension in their jaws. They did not hug me. My father pulled out the chair opposite me and sat down with a heavy sigh, placing his phone on the table face up. My mother sat beside him, refusing to make eye contact with the barista who came to take their order. "This has to stop, Evelyn," my father said. His voice was low, controlled, the same tone he used when negotiating a contract breach. "The Sterling deal is in a delicate phase. We have received 3 inquiries about our family stability in the last 24 hours. Do you have any idea what you are doing to us?" I took a sip of my coffee. It was bitter, just the way I needed it to be. "I am not doing anything to you," I said calmly. "I simply answered a question. You were not there." "I said you were not there. You made it sound like we abandoned you." My mother snapped, finally looking at me. Her eyes were hard, devoid of the maternal warmth I used to hallucinate was there. "We were on a trip. It was a misunderstanding. We thought the date was later. You need to issue a correction. Tell that reporter you got the dates mixed up. Tell them we had a family emergency." I looked at them, really looked at them. For 32 years, I had seen them as giants, as the arbiters of my worth. Now, sitting across from me, begging me to lie to protect their social standing, they looked small, they looked desperate. "I will not lie for you," I said. The words felt solid in my mouth. My father leaned forward, his hands clasping together. "Evelyn, be reasonable. We are family. We support each other. You are acting like we have never done anything for you. We paid for your undergraduate degree. We gave you a start." "You paid for my undergraduate degree because it was a tax write-off," I corrected him. "And I paid for my master's degree. I paid for my apartment. And 3 years ago, I paid for your liquidity crisis." The table went silent. My mother's mouth opened slightly, then closed. My father stiffened. "I wired you $50,000. I continued, my voice steady and devoid of emotion. "You asked for it because you were afraid the bank would freeze your assets. I emptied my savings account. You never paid it back. You never even said thank you. You just took it because you thought it was your right." "That is vulgar," my mother whispered, clutching her scarf. "Bringing up money like that. We raised you. We put a roof over your head. You put a roof over an investment," I said. "And now you are angry because the investment has stopped paying dividends and started talking." My father's face turned a shade of red that clashed with his tan. "If you do not fix this, Evelyn, you are cutting yourself off. No more access. No more network. You will be on your own. I almost laughed. The threat was so empty it rattled. I have been on my own since I was 12 years old. I said, I was alone when I won the debate championship. I was alone when I got my first promotion. I was alone when I graduated from Harvard. You are not threatening me with isolation. Dad, you are threatening me with freedom. I stood up. I placed a $5 bill on the table to cover my coffee. I did not wait for them to respond. I did not wait for the guilt trip or the anger. I looked at them one last time, memorizing the look of shock on their faces. It was the look of people who had tried to lean on a wall they thought was load-bearing, only to find out it had been removed years ago. I am done being your secret bank account and your public prop, I said. Enjoy your meeting with the Sterling partners. I walked out of the coffee shop and into the busy street. The air tasted cleaner than it had in years. Behind me, through the glass window, I could see them sitting in the heavy silence I had left behind. 2 perfect statues crumbling under the weight of the truth. 2 days after leaving my parents in that coffee shop, my phone rang. It was not a family member, and it was not a lifestyle blogger asking for a follow-up on the sad graduation girl. It was Marcus Vance, an investigative journalist for the Financial Observer. He had a voice like gravel and a reputation for tearing down corporate facades. He did not want to talk about my feelings. He wanted to talk about my father's consulting firm. Ms. Moore, he said, skipping the pleasantries. We have been looking into the sudden rise of more global strategies over the last 5 years. We noticed a statistical anomaly. Their most successful risk models align almost perfectly with the white papers you published internally at Northbridge Analysis Group. Did you license your work to them? I stood in the middle of my kitchen, the phone pressed hard against my ear. The room seemed to tilt. License I had never licensed anything. But I remembered the nights. I remembered the weekends. I remembered my father sending me drafts of his projects, claiming he was overwhelmed, asking me to just take a look because I was the math whiz. I would stay up until 4 in the morning, rewriting his flawed algorithms, fixing his broken models, and sending them back to him with detailed notes. I thought I was being a good daughter. I thought I was helping my stressed father keep his business afloat. No, I said, my voice barely a whisper. I did not license anything. We suspected as much, Marcus said. Can you prove you wrote the code I looked at the closet in the hallway? On the top shelf, buried under old winter coats, was a plastic bin filled with external hard drives and old laptops. I was a data hoarder. I never deleted anything. Every email, every file, every time-stamped correction I had sent to my father's personal email address was sitting in that box. I met Marcus an hour later. I brought the hard drives. We sat in his car, the air conditioning blasting against the humid afternoon heat, and I watched him scroll through 5 years of evidence. Jesus, Marcus muttered, looking at a spreadsheet from 3 years ago. This is the proprietary Moore algorithm they sold to the city pension fund. You wrote the entire back end. I thought I was just helping him fix a bug, I said. I felt cold. He told me it was a minor project for a small client. He sold this contract for $200,000, Marcus said. The betrayal hit me harder than the empty chair at graduation. The empty chair was negligence. This was theft. They had not just ignored me. They had harvested me. My entire career, my intellect, my sleepless nights, they had packaged it all up, put their names on it, and sold it to build the life they refused to let me share. The Tuscany trip, the country club memberships, the tailored suits I had paid for them, not just with the $50,000 loan, but with my mind. When Marcus published the story the next morning, the tone was not sympathetic. It was forensic. The headline read, "The Shadow Analyst, How Evelyn Moore Built the Empire That Disowned Her." The reaction was instantaneous and violent. The internet ceased to be a place of emotional support and became a courtroom. The Sterling partners, who had been worried about family stability, were now reading about intellectual property theft and fraud. The media camped out on my parents' lawn. I saw a clip on the news of my father trying to walk to his car, a microphone shoved in his face. Mr. Moore, did your daughter write the risk assessment for the 2023 merger? A reporter shouted. My father looked into the camera. For the first time, he looked old. He looked terrified. He pushed the microphone away and scrambled into his sedan, but the image was already beamed to millions of screens. They had lost control. They could not spin this as a misunderstood family spat. This was business. This was money. And they had been caught stealing from the very person they claimed to be ashamed of. I sat in my apartment, the blinds drawn against the photographers gathering on the sidewalk below. My phone was ringing again, but I did not answer. I was done answering. I looked at the hard drive sitting on my table. There was one more folder I had not given Marcus yet. It contained the tax documents my father had asked me to optimize 6 years ago. If I released it, I would not just be exposing their incompetence. I would be inviting the IRS into their lives. I picked up the drive. My hand did not shake. I realized then that this was no longer about a graduation ceremony. It was not about hurt feelings or a desire for an apology. It was about balance. They had taken everything from me, my time, my talent, my trust. Now, the ledger was finally going to be squared. I put the drive in an envelope and sealed it. There was no going back now. The daughter they knew was gone. The witness had arrived. The article in the Financial Observer did not just make waves, it caused a tsunami. By noon on the day of publication, the carefully constructed facade of more global strategies had disintegrated. The headline was shared across platforms my parents did not even know existed. Business insiders were not discussing the morality of missing a graduation. They were discussing the legality of misrepresenting intellectual property in a merger acquisition. The Sterling partners pulled out of the deal at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. They issued a brief statement citing due diligence discrepancies, which in corporate language meant they had realized they were buying stolen goods. My phone continued to ring, but the tone of the messages had shifted violently. The initial wave of parental scolding had evaporated, replaced by a frantic, venomous panic. My mother left a voicemail that lasted 3 minutes. She did not cry. She did not apologize. She screamed. She told me I was vindictive. She told me I had destroyed their retirement. She asked how I could sleep at night knowing I had humiliated them in front of their friends at the club. "You are ungrateful," she shouted into the receiver, her voice cracking. "We gave you everything, and you repay us by burning the house down." I listened to the message once. Then I saved it. It was no longer a guilt trip. It was evidence. The next day, a lawyer representing my father contacted me. He had a smooth, conciliatory voice that made my skin crawl. He proposed a settlement. If I agreed to sign a non-disclosure agreement and retract my statements to the press, my father was willing to pay me a retroactive consulting fee of $200,000. $200,000. It was a significant amount of money. It was enough to pay off my student loans and put a down payment on a house. But as I sat there listening to the lawyer explain the payment structure, I realized that taking the money would mean selling the only thing I had truly earned my voice. They were trying to buy my silence because they could no longer afford my truth. "Tell my father," I said, interrupting the lawyer mid-sentence, "that my silence is not for sale. And tell him that if he contacts me again, I will release the tax documents I found in the 2018 folder." The line went dead. The fallout was not limited to my family's bank account. I became a lightning rod for a massive cultural debate. Internet forums were split. 50% of the comments hailed me as a hero for toxic children everywhere. The other 50% called me a traitor who should have kept family business private. Strangers analyzed my face, my career, and my motives. A week ago, this scrutiny would have paralyzed me. I would have hidden under my covers, terrified of being misunderstood. But something had changed. I walked down the street with my head up. I realized that the fear of judgment was a cage my parents had built for me, and I had walked out of it the moment I posted that picture. The truth was armor. As long as I had nothing to hide, they could not hurt me. A prestigious women's leadership conference in New York reached out. They did not want me to talk about data analysis. They wanted me to speak on a panel titled "The Cost of Autonomy Breaking Cycles in Life and Business." I accepted without hesitation. Standing on that stage a week later, looking out at 500 strangers, I did not feel the crushing loneliness I had felt at Harvard. I felt solid. We are taught that loyalty is silent. I told the audience, my voice echoing in the auditorium. But sometimes, loyalty to yourself requires making a lot of noise. You cannot save people who are determined to drown you to keep themselves afloat. The applause was real this time. It was not polite. It was raucous. Back in Redwood Heights, the consequences for my parents were becoming tangible. I heard through an old neighbor that the country club had suspended their membership pending an internal review of conduct. My father's clients were fleeing to competitors. The neighbors, who had once envied their manicured lawn and perfect life, were now giving them a wide berth at the grocery store. They were experiencing the one thing they had inflicted on me for decades. They were being ignored. They were being shut out. The silence they had weaponized was finally turning around to swallow them whole. The storm had passed, leaving behind a strange, flat calm. The adrenaline that had fueled me through the interviews and the revelations had evaporated, leaving me with the cold, hard reality of what I had done. I sat on my balcony watching the sunset over Redwood Heights. I had won. The public knew the truth. My career was soaring. My bank account was safe. But there was a hollow ache in my chest that no amount of vindication could fill. I realized that by exposing them, I had not just punished them. I had finalized the divorce between us. There would be no Christmas dinners, awkward as they were. There would be no reluctant phone calls. I had killed the hope that one day, miraculously, they would wake up and love me the way I wanted. That hope had been a toxic weed, but it was the only thing that had grown in the garden of my childhood. Now, the earth was scorched. I met Maya for lunch on Tuesday. Maya had known me since we were 7 years old. She had seen me cry in the bathroom at prom when my parents forgot to pick me up. She sat across from me, stirring her iced tea, looking at me with soft, knowing eyes. Did I go too far? I asked her. The question had been keeping me awake for 3 nights. Maybe I should have just posted the picture and left it at that. Maybe the financial stuff was too much. Maya stopped stirring. She leaned forward. Evelyn, you did not burn down their house. You just stopped putting out the fires they started. There is a difference. Her words settled in my mind. Maturity. I was learning. Was not about being the bigger person and absorbing the blow. It was about accepting that the blow happened and refusing to let it define the rest of the fight. That night, I sat at my desk and pulled out a sheet of crisp white stationery. I uncapped my favorite pen. I began to write. Dear Mom and Dad. I wrote for an hour. I poured out 32 years of grief. I wrote about the debate trophy. I wrote about the graduation. I wrote about the check I sent when I wanted to buy a home. I wrote about how much I had wanted to be enough for them. I did not write with anger. I wrote with a profound, aching sadness. I told them that I forgave them, not because they deserved it, but because I could not carry the weight of hating them anymore. When I finished, the pages were covered in my tight, slanted handwriting. I folded the letter. I held it in my hand, feeling its weight. Then, I walked to the kitchen sink. I struck a match and held it to the corner of the paper. I watched the flames curl the edges, turning my pain into ash and smoke. I did not mail it. They would not have understood it anyway. They would have scanned it for leverage or proof of weakness. The letter was not for them. It was for me. I went back to the closet and took out the envelope containing the tax documents from 2018, the final weapon I had threatened to use. I could send it to the IRS. I could ensure they lost everything, down to the house and the cars. It would be a total victory. It would be the ultimate revenge. I put the envelope in the shredder. I listened to the machine grind the paper into confetti. I did not need to destroy them to save myself. I had already done the hard part. I had spoken the truth. Anything more would just be cruelty, and I refused to become like them. As the noise of the shredder faded, a sudden, unexpected silence filled the room. But this time, it was not the heavy, oppressive silence of waiting for a phone that would not ring. It was the silence of a blank page. It was peaceful. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with air that felt entirely my own. I was ready for what came next. I was ready to walk onto a stage where I actually belonged. 6 months later, I stood backstage at the Orion Academic Gala in downtown Boston. The air smelled of expensive lilies and floor wax. This was not a university ceremony held on a humid lawn with thousands of students. This was an intimate gathering of the brightest minds in economic analytics. I adjusted the silk lapel of my white suit. I had bought it yesterday. I paid $2,000 for it, and I did not feel a single pang of guilt. There were no reserved seats in the front row for the Moore family. I had not sent an invitation. I had not checked the mailbox for an RSVP. I had not spent the morning looking at my phone, wondering if a flight from Europe had landed on time. The space where my parents would have sat was filled by my colleagues from my new firm, by Maya, and by people who actually knew the color of my eyes. The empty chair that had haunted me at Harvard was gone. It was not empty anymore. It was simply not theirs. When the announcer called my name, the applause was different. It was not the polite, scattered clapping of a stadium crowd waiting for the next person. It was warm. It was solid. It felt like an embrace. I walked to the podium and placed my hands on the cool wood. The lights were blinding, washing out the faces in the audience, but I did not need to see them to know they were with me. I leaned into the microphone. We spend our lives waiting for permission to matter. I said, my voice steady and clear. We wait for a parent, a partner, or a boss to turn on the spotlight and tell us we are visible. We hand them the switch and hope they decide to flick it on. I paused. I looked directly into the camera lens at the back of the room, knowing the footage would be streamed online. I am done waiting for the switch to be flipped by someone else. I continued, tonight, I am not thanking a lineage or a legacy. I would like to thank the one person who showed up for every late night, every early morning, and every moment of crippling doubt when the world was silent. I would like to thank myself. The room went deadly quiet for a heartbeat, and then it erupted. It was a standing ovation. I saw Maya wiping her eyes in the third row. I saw Marcus, the journalist, nodding from the press box. I knew the reporters were back there, too. They were waiting to ask me about the bankruptcy filing my father had submitted 3 days ago. They wanted a soundbite about the collapse of the Moore Empire. They wanted the drama. But I would give them nothing. My parents were ghosts now, fading into the background of a story they used to control. I walked off the stage with the heavy glass award cradled in my arm. Back in the quiet of the green room, my phone buzzed against the marble makeup table. It vibrated once, a harsh, mechanical sound. I looked at the screen. Father. It was the first time he had called in 2 months. It was likely a plea. Maybe it was a threat. Maybe he wanted to scream, or maybe, finally, he wanted to say he was sorry. It did not matter. The apology was 10 years too late, and the anger was no longer my burden to carry. I did not decline the call. I did not block the number. I simply watched the screen light up and then fade back to black. I picked up my purse and opened the rear exit door. The cool night air of Boston hit my face. The revenge was not in the destruction of their business, though that had happened. The revenge was not in the public humiliation, though they had earned it. The true revenge was that I was happy without them. That was the one thing they could never take back, and the one thing they could never destroy. I stepped into the waiting car and closed the door. As we pulled away from the curb, I could still hear the sound of applause coming from inside the theater, loud and unbroken, following me all the way home. Thank you so much for listening to Evelyn's story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today, so please leave a comment below to share your thoughts and let us connect. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to the Mira Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit that hype button to help this story be heard by even more people.